Hello, my friend. The world of magic, filled with legends and ancient tales, is opening its gates once again. Tonight, in the Gryffindor dormitory by the crackling fireplace, I will share another story with my friends. Join us, for the magic is about to come alive. In the deep and drafty cellars beneath Malfoy Manor, where the stone walls whispered of secrets and shadows, a small figure moved with careful, silent steps. His feet were bare upon the cold flagstones, his ears long and twitching, and his eyes, great, round, and green as old glass, gleamed in the torchlight. His name was Dobby, and he was a house elf bound by ancient magic to serve the noble house of Malfoy. The manor loomed above like a slumbering beast, its spires clawing at the gray sky, its windows like watching eyes. In the day it was filled with guests in dark robes and colder voices, but at night the halls grew quiet and Dobby could think. And it was dangerous for a house elf to think. Dobby had always done his duties well. He scrubbed the silver, polished the floors until they shone like mirrors, and made sure Master Lucius Malfoy's boots were arranged precisely so. Toes pointed north. But in truth, Dobby's heart was not in his chores. It lay hidden beneath a growing worry, a secret dread that stirred whenever his master spoke in hushed tones or received strange letters by owl. One such night had come. Dobby had been cleaning in the study, his rag moving in circles across the carved legs of an ancient chair, when he heard Lucius's voice behind the closed door. "Riddle's diary," Lucius was saying, and there was a cold delight in his tone, like the purring of a Kneazle before a strike. "Old magic, very old. It will open the path again. The boy won't know what hit him." Dobby's hand froze mid-Polish. His ears twitched. Another voice, silky, sharp, replied, "Are you sure it's wise, Lucius? The Dark Lord may be gone, but his relics still burn with power. If it falls into the wrong hands, it won't. I shall make sure it finds its way into Hogwarts. Quietly, hidden in a student's bag, perhaps. Let it do its work. A little chaos will remind the school what blood purity means." Dobby's heart pounded. Hogwarts. That was the school he'd heard whispers about. The place where brave young witches and wizards learned magic, where Albus Dumbledore reigned like a wise old owl, and where Harry Potter, the boy who had defied the Dark Lord, now studied. If this cursed diary reached Hogwarts, who knew what horrors might awaken? The voices grew distant as the men walked off, but the fear lingered in Dobby like frost. He pressed his hand to his chest, where the magic of servitude ached like a chain. He should not know what he knew, he should not think, but Dobby, unlike most house elves, had a strange quirk, a little flame inside that had never quite gone out. He wanted to be free, not just of chores or commands, but of the silence, the fear, the dark things whispered in corners. And tonight, that little flame flared high. "They must stop it," Dobby whispered to himself, trembling. Of course, he could not simply disobey. House elves were bound by magic older than the stones of Hogwarts. But there were ways to work around rules. Clever, quiet ways. So Dobby did what no house elf of his station was meant to do. He began to plan. In the weeks that followed, he watched. He listened. He kept track of every time Lucius entered the vault chamber and every time he emerged looking slightly smug, as if he'd hidden something most vile and precious. Dobby noticed, too, a snake-carved box that was not there before, tucked high on a shelf, warded by spells that shimmered with dark intent. It had the feel of danger, of secrets. Dobby grew bolder, sneaking closer each night, studying the patterns of patrols and protections. The Malfoy vault was not just guarded by spells, but by one other, a house elf named Creel. Creel had served the Malfoys for longer than Dobby had been alive. His eyes were small and sunken, his face tight and expressionless. He spoke little, but watched much. Creel was not like Dobby. He had no dreams of freedom. He liked the rules. And Dobby knew if Creel caught wind of his plan, the punishment would be beyond cruel. It didn't stop. Dobby would not stop. He could not. He waited for a moonless night, when the manor's windows were shuttered and its masters asleep. He tiptoed through the dark halls, carrying nothing but a sliver of candlelight and his courage, which was thin and wavering, but real. When he reached the heavy iron door of the vault, he pressed his fingers to the stone beside it. He had learned the rune pattern from watching Creel. Now, with shaking hands, he traced the shape. A triangle, a spiral, a line. The wards hissed softly, then melted away like mist. Inside, the air was cold and thick, filled with the scent of dust and ancient magic. Shelves lined the walls, heavy with artifacts. Goblets that whispered curses, masks with eyes that seemed to follow, and that snake-shaped box glowing faintly green under the candle's breath. Dobby stepped closer. The box pulsed with a faint heat. He reached out, and then a noise behind him made his blood freeze. "Quirrell sees you, Dobby." The voice was soft, deadly. Dobby turned slowly. Creel stood in the doorway, his silhouette sharp against the gloom. His eyes were unreadable. "Back to your quarters," he said. Dobby's fingers hovered near the box. I must protect the school. I heard Master Lucius. He means to..." Quill took a step forward, and suddenly his hand flared with crackling magic. "You speak out of turn. You think you know better than your master. You shame our kind." "Please seek no shame," Dobby said, swallowing hard. Only to stop. Something terrible." The silence that followed was long. Then Creel said, "You forget your place." With a flick of his hand, the world exploded into pain. Dobby crumpled to the ground as the punishment spell struck, sharp and searing. Not enough to kill, just enough to remind. The last thing he saw before the darkness claimed him was the box, still glowing, still waiting, and in the shadow of his thoughts, one promise echoed like a bell. "I will not give up. I will find a way." When Dobby awoke, the world was a blur of flickering torchlight and aching limbs. He was lying on the cold stone of his sleeping nook beneath the stairs, a rough blanket draped over his shoulders and a faint metallic taste in his mouth. The manor above was quiet, so quiet that he knew the punishment had come in the dead of night, swift and secret, so as not to disturb the fine tapestries or the slumbering pride of the Malfoy household. The magic that bound his elves was cruelly clever. It did not only punish defiance, it buried guilt deep in their bones, so that even just thoughts of resistance could feel like betrayal. Dobby had felt it then, the sickening twist of pain not only from Krill's hex, but from the ancient magic itself. He had disobeyed. He had tried to act outside his place. And yet, as he lay there battered and sore, he felt no regret, only frustration that he had failed. For days afterward, he moved about his duties with a limp and a faint tremble in his fingers, but the fire within him had not gone out. He worked more quietly now, but his eyes watched everything. He knew the diary remained hidden, locked away behind spells that had nearly bested him. Worse still, Creel now watched him closely, his pale eyes following Dobby whenever their paths crossed, as though waiting for another sign of rebellion. The manor grew darker as the summer waned. Strange visitors arrived in the evenings, cloaked in shadow and carrying with them whispers of unrest. Dobby often had to clean up after their gatherings. Stained goblets, broken crystal phials, and the faint trace of ash that smelled not quite like fire. He heard more names now, dangerous names. The diary was not the only cursed object Lucius Malfoy possessed, nor was he the only one scheming to return old darkness to the world. It was one night in August, while scrubbing the base of a great marble column in the dining hall, that Dobby overheard a conversation that stirred his heart with both hope and dread. Narcissa Malfoy had entered, her voice low and sharp, speaking to her husband with barely concealed alarm. "You mean to do what, Lucius? Send it with us, student?" Lucius's reply was calm and cold. "The Weasley girl. New to the school, easily manipulated. The diary will whisper to her, guide her. No one will suspect. Potter's always watching out for that family. How ironic if one of them should help destroy him." Dobby's cloth froze in his hand. The plan was nearly in motion. The cursed diary was to be slipped into the belongings of an unsuspecting child, smuggled into the very heart of Hogwarts. The danger was no longer distant. It was coming. That night, Dobby could not sleep. He lay curled in his cupboard, the thoughts tumbling through his mind like storm clouds. He had tried to take the diary, and he had failed. He could not breach the vault again, not with Creel standing guard. But there was another path, a riskier one, and it had been forming in his mind ever since he had first heard the name. Harry Potter. Harry Potter. The boy who had lived, the one who had struck down the Dark Lord as a baby, who now lived among muggles and studied magic at Hogwarts. Dobby had never seen him, but he had heard enough. The other elves spoke his name in hushed awe. If there was anyone who might resist the evil within the diary, it was him. A plan took root. Dobby would not stop the diary himself, but he could warn the boy. He could find a way to reach him before the diary did. It was madness, of course. Housels were forbidden from revealing their master's secrets. To even speak of the Malfoy's dark dealings could tear his magic apart. But if he were clever, if he didn't name names, if he only hinted, perhaps he could slip through the binding. There was only one obstacle. He had no idea where Harry Potter lived. Days passed. Dobby tried to listen for clues, catching snatches of conversation from the Malfoys, from guests, even from the newspapers he was sometimes allowed to polish. At last, luck or fate favored him. Lucius had left a copy of the Daily Prophet in his study. its front page creased and spotted with wine. Dobby, tidying the room after his master had stormed off, dared to smooth the page and read. There, in an article about Arthur Weasley's latest raid on a dark artifact dealer, was a mention of Harry Potter staying with the Weasleys in Otteries and Catchpole, preparing to return to Hogwarts for his second year. Dobby's heart leapt. If Harry was not yet at school, then Dobby had time, just barely. He had never left the manor grounds before, not truly. House elves were bound to their families' homes, their magic tethered like a leash. But there were loopholes. A house elf could, under certain conditions, apparate to a place if it were in service of their master's commands, or if they bent the rules carefully, subtly, as Dobby now meant to do. He prepared carefully. He left no signs. He stole nothing but a crumb of bread and a clean rag which he tied about his neck like a scarf. He waited until Crail was stationed on the far side of the manor, overseeing the cleaning of the wine cellar, and then, heart hammering in his chest, he stepped into the shadows near the garden wall and disapparated. The sensation was like diving through ice. Apparating from a place one was magically bound to was no easy feat. It stretched the threads of magic dangerously thin. But Dobby managed it. When he reappeared, it was in the hedges near a small rickety house with a crooked chimney and a signpost that read the Burrow. It was just past midnight. He crept toward the house, moving with the silence of a leaf on the wind. From within he could hear the soft murmur of voices, one deep and fatherly, another stern but kind. And above it all, faint as a whisper, the voice of a boy. Dobby knew it was him. He scaled the drain pipe, nimble as a squirrel, and peered in through a cracked window. There, in a small bedroom cluttered with trunks, books, and a cage containing a sleepy owl, sat Harry Potter. His black hair tousled, his glasses askew, reading by wandlight. Dobby's breath caught in his throat. The boy looked so ordinary, so young, and yet there was something about him, something steady and brave in the way he held himself. Dobby had never spoken to a wizard like this before. He had never dared, but he could not back away now. With trembling fingers, he tapped once, twice, on the glass. Harry looked up, startled. Then he stood and crossed to the window, frowning slightly as he opened it. And so, in the quiet of that summer night, under the watchful gaze of the stars, a house elf entered a wizard's bedroom, carrying with him a warning, a burden, and the beginning of a very strange friendship. Harry Potter stared at the strange creature on his windowsill, his brow furrowed beneath his untidy black fringe. He had seen many odd things since entering the wizarding world: talking portraits, ghosts floating through ceilings, even a three-headed dog, but never anything quite like the small, trembling figure now bowing so low his long nose brushed the windowsill. "Hello?" Harry said, unsure whether to be alarmed or polite. "Who are you?" Dobby straightened, eyes wide with both awe and anxiety. "Harry Potter, sir. Such an honor it is, sir. Dobby has heard of your greatness, sir, and Dobby has come to warn you, sir." "Oh, but Dobby is not supposed to be here." His voice cracked with panic, and he clutched at the pillowcase he wore like a tunic, twisting it in his hands as though trying to wring the fear from it. Harry glanced toward the closed door, half worried that someone in the burrow might wake and come investigate the noise. "Keep your voice down," he said quickly. "You've come to warn me. About what?" Dobby stepped inside fully, hopping down onto the worn wooden floorboards with surprising grace. His bat-like ears drooped, and his huge eyes shone with urgency. "There is a plot, Harry Potter, a terrible plot that will unfold at Hogwarts this year. Dobby has seen it, heard it, even felt it in the magic around him. Hogwarts is not safe. You must not go back." Harry stared at the elf, unsure what to make of him. "What do you mean? What sort of plot?" At once Dobby's expression turned agonized, and he slapped his hands over his mouth. His fingers twitched, his whole body quivered, and then, as though he could not help himself, he wailed, "Dobby cannot say. Dobby is bound, but it is dark and dangerous and tied to the past, sir, to the Dark Lord's terrible legacy." Harry felt a cold prickling at the back of his neck. "Is this about Voldemort?" he asked. Dobby yelped and dropped to the floor. "Do not say his name, sir. Dobby begs you." "Sorry," Harry said quickly. "But if he's gone, then what danger?" "Wait. He's gone, but not gone," Dobby interrupted, struggling to sit up. "His followers remain. His things remain. Not all evil vanishes when the master falls. Sometimes it clings to objects, to memories, and waits for someone foolish enough to wake it." Harry had learned enough in his first year to take such warnings seriously, but still, he couldn't imagine not returning to Hogwarts. It wasn't just a school. It was his home, the first place he had ever truly belonged. "I have to go back," he said firmly. "Hogwarts is where I belong." Dobby's ears drooped even further. "Then terrible things will happen, Harry Potter." Dobby tried to stop it. Dobby tried to take the thing that brings danger. But Dobby failed. "You tried to take it?" Harry asked. "Take what?" Dobby's mouth opened, then shut again, as though some invisible force had clamped it closed. His body trembled, and suddenly he began hitting his head against the wall, hard. "Bad Dobby! Bad Dobby!" Dobby almost spoke against his masters. "Stop it!" Harry cried, rushing forward to pull the elf away from the wall. "You don't have to hurt yourself." Dobby sniffled, wiping his nose on his pillowcase. "It is the rules, sir. The old magic punishes house elves who betray their masters. But Dobby must try. Dobby must warn you." Harry frowned, helping the elf steady himself. "If you can't tell me who your masters are, can you at least tell me what the danger is? Is it a person? A creature?" Again, Dobby shook his head violently. "Dobby cannot say. But he can tell this. It is a thing of ink and lies. A thing that writes with your own hand, whispers with your own voice. It will twist your thoughts and open doors that should remain shut." Harry blinked. "A thing that writes with your hand? You mean a cursed book?" Dobby clapped his hands over his ears. "No more, no more. Dobby should not be here, sir. Dobby's magic phrase just standing in your presence." He stood abruptly, his knees knocking. "But Dobby has done what he could. He has warned you. Do not go back to Hogwarts, Harry Potter. If you do, danger will follow. Dobby begs you." Before Harry could say anything else, there was a pop like a cork, and Dobby vanished. Harry stood frozen for a moment, staring at the spot where the elf had stood. A cursed book. A plot. A warning. He didn't know what to make of it all, but one thing was certain. Something dark was on the horizon, and he would need to be ready. Far away, back within the cold stone halls of Malfoy Manor, Dobby reappeared in the corner of the kitchen, gasping for breath. The apparition had drained him more than expected, and already he felt the first curl of pain stirring deep within his chest. Magic had noticed his absence. It would not be long before the punishment came. He staggered to his sleeping place beneath the stairs and curled up, wrapping his arms around his knees. He had done it. He had reached the boy. He had planted the seed. As the first sparks of pain ignited behind his eyes, he bit his lip hard enough to draw blood and reminded himself again and again that it was worth it. And high above, in a chamber locked by spells and guarded by silence, the snake-etched box sat in stillness, the cursed diary within humming with quiet hunger. Its time had not yet come, but it was near. The weeks that followed passed in slow dread for Dobby, like watching storm clouds crawl across a pale sky. He did his work, quiet and precise, without complaint. The bruises from his punishments faded, but the ache in his bones lingered, as if his very magic had been scorched by fire. Creel eyed him with silent suspicion, though he never spoke of the night Dobby had entered the vault. That silence frightened Dobby more than shouting would have. Creel was no fool. He knew what had been attempted, but for some reason he had not reported it. Perhaps, Dobby feared, his fellow elf had his own reasons for waiting. The days shortened, and autumn came, crisp and chill, rustling the ivy across the stone walls of the manor. The cursed diary had vanished. Dobby noticed its absence one morning as he dusted the entrance hall and passed by Lucius Malfoy's study. The door was ajar, and through it he saw the shelf that once held the snake-etched box. Now bare, the dust disturbed, the protective runes deactivated. His heart sank. The cursed object was no longer hidden. It had been sent out into the world. He worked faster that day, anxious to avoid being seen, his thoughts chasing themselves in circles. Lucius must have found his way to the Weasley girl, as he had planned. Or perhaps he had used another means, something more subtle. Either way, the danger was in motion now. The warning Dobby had given Harry Potter was no longer a courtesy. It was a thread of hope in a tapestry of rising darkness. Then, one evening, Dobby heard the name again. He had been summoned to serve tea to Narcissa and her sister Bellatrix Lestrange, who had come unexpectedly, her eyes glittering and wild, her laughter sharp as a blade. Dobby moved like a shadow between them, careful not to draw attention, but as he poured the steaming tea, he caught the tail of their conversation. "The school is already in an uproar," Bellatrix was saying, stirring her cup with a wand instead of a spoon. "A cat petrified, they say. Filthy blood creatures causing panic. It won't be long now before the truth slips through." Narcissa, who rarely showed emotion beyond a mild frown, seemed troubled. "Do you really think it will work? The diary?" Bellatrix laughed softly. "If the girl is weak enough, it will speak through her. The heir's will is written in that ink. You know what he intended. It only needs a vessel." Dobby almost dropped the tray. The air, the chamber, the diary wasn't simply a cursed object. It was a key, one that could open ancient terror sealed deep beneath the school. Dobby had heard tales whispered by portraits and wandering ghosts. Hogwarts was old, and not all of its secrets were harmless. Some doors had been shut for good reason. That night, as he scrubbed the hearth in the drawing room, Dobby wept silently, the tears soaking into the soot. He had tried. He had warned Harry Potter, but it had not been enough. The next morning, a letter arrived by owl addressed to Lucius. Dobby did not see its contents, but when he passed the study later, he heard his master's low chuckle. "Everything is proceeding," Lucius murmured to himself, poring over the parchment. "Even Dumbledore cannot shield them forever. Soon they will remember what true fear feels like." Dobby left the room before he could hear more. His heart beat like a caged bird's. If the headmaster himself could not stop what was coming, what hope remained? He could not return to Hogwarts. The magic of his binding would not allow it. But he had to know what was happening. He had to find out whether Harry was safe, whether the diary had been opened, whether the monster had been released. There was only one way. The Malfoys, for all their pride and caution, were not immune to carelessness. Their youngest, Draco, had returned from school for a weekend, something about a special meeting of the Sacred 28. Dobby was assigned to attend him during his stay, fetching robes, polishing his boots, and listening to endless complaints about mudbloods and how unfair the professors were. It was while cleaning Draco's trunk that Dobby saw it. A folded parchment, stained at the edges, tucked beneath a pile of school books. He opened it carefully, heart thumping. It was a letter from a boy named Theodore Knott. "Did you see what happened to Mrs. Norris? Father says it's the monster from the chamber. Goyle thinks it's Potter's doing. Says he was found right at the scene. I reckon he's just trying to look heroic, like always." Dobby's hands trembled. It had begun. The creature was loose, and suspicion had already fallen on Harry. The boy he had tried to protect was now caught in the snare. Worse still, if the heir's monster was at large. The school was in danger far beyond what most students could imagine. Petrification was only the beginning. He returned the letter to its place, shutting the trunk softly. The rest of the day passed in a blur, his thoughts far from the manor's marble halls. He needed to act, but how? He could not go to Hogwarts. He could not speak of what he knew, but there was one possibility left, one more desperate attempt that might steer fate back toward the light. There were elves at Hogwarts. Perhaps one of them could help. It was not common for house elves to conspire. Most were loyal, bound by deep magic and long tradition, and those who served at the castle rarely left its walls. But there was one, Dobby remembered, who had once spoken to his cousin, an elf named Winky, who served a lesser pure-blood family that visited the castle often. If Dobby could reach her, if he could send word to her through the old elf ways, messages whispered through fire and water, through candle flames and teacups, perhaps she could pass a warning to someone who mattered. He spent the next evening preparing the spell, a subtle enchantment woven into a silver teapot he knew would be sent ahead to Hogwarts for an upcoming ministry inspection. He used a sliver of his own magic, hidden in the steam, laced into the shape of a whisper. "Winky," he said, "the diary is open. A child is being used. The chamber is real. Tell the headmaster." It was dangerous magic, old and forbidden, but Dobby had no choice. He poured all the strength he had into the spell and sent it with the tea. Then he waited, every nerve on edge, every sound magnified. Days pass. Then, one night, Dobby felt something strange, a warmth in his chest, like a kind word spoken in a dream. It was the return signal, short, faint, but clear. Message received. Dobby sank to his knees in relief. A message had reached Hogwarts. He had done all he could. For now, the days that followed were among the longest Dobby had ever endured. Though the manor bustled with its usual frostbitten grandeur, and though the Malfoys went about their affairs with measured calm, Dobby felt like he was living in the lull before a great storm. He polished the banisters, dusted the suits of armor, and folded silken robes in silence, his ears trained on every whisper, his mind constantly reaching beyond the stone walls of the manor, stretching towards Hogwarts. He thought of the boy with the lightning-shaped scar, the way Harry had spoken so calmly, even kindly, when Dobby had warned him. He had not laughed, had not mocked. He had listened. And that had meant more to Dobby than any act of magic. The response from Winky had stirred hope in him, faint but real. If the headmaster knew, then perhaps steps were already being taken. But Dobby also knew that the danger they faced was not one that could be so easily stopped. The magic tied to that diary was not simply clever. It was old and cruel, rooted in the mind of a wizard who had once walked the castle's halls under a different name. More than once, Dobby had glimpsed the name Tom Riddle etched faintly on the inside of the diary's cover. He remembered it because Lucius had spoken it long ago, with a mixture of distaste and reverence. The boy was always ambitious, he had muttered to a guest, too clever for his own good, but the Dark Lord saw potential in him. Now that boy's memory lived on, ink-bound and festering in the hands of an innocent girl. One evening, as frost began to claim the windows, Dobby passed through the grand corridor that led to the drawing room and caught sight of Lucius speaking with a tall, hunched wizard in a travel-stained cloak. The man had a long, pointed beard and a crooked smile, but there was something untrustworthy in his tone. "It's all unfolding, Lucius," the man was saying. "2 more attacks. Dumbledore's hands are tied. The governors are whispering already. If this keeps up, there'll be no choice but to suspend him." Lucius smiled faintly, and his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "That is the idea. Without Dumbledore, the school is weak, and then perhaps certain traditions may return." Dobby dared not linger, but his heart beat faster. If the headmaster were removed, Hogwarts would be defenseless. The diary's influence would grow unchecked. The attacks, whatever form they took, were only the beginning. That night, as the wind howled outside and the manor fell into uneasy silence, Dobby sat beneath the stairs, arms curled around his knees. He was so small in the grand scheme of things, bound by laws he had never chosen, hidden in a house that saw him only as a tool. But he could not sit idly by, not while children were being attacked, not while the shadow of the Dark Lord crept back into the world. Then, on a particularly bitter morning, a noise in the entrance hall brought news that made his heart leap. Lucius had returned from the ministry, his cloak still damp with sleet, his temper high. Narcissa met him in the hall, and Dobby, cleaning the nearby sconces, dared to listen. "Dumbledore has been removed," Lucius said, voice sharp with triumph. "They brought the governors round, fools. One only needed the right words and a bit of pressure." "But what of the girl?" Narcissa asked. "Has it matured?" Lucius shook his head. "Not yet, but she is slipping further into it. Soon the diary will have enough of her. Soon it will open." Dobby nearly dropped his cloth. So the diary was still with the girl. The possession was deepening. If it reached its full power, there was no telling what might be unleashed. Dobby could feel it now more clearly than ever. Magic like a storm building over the hills. If the Chamber of Secrets truly opened, people would die. Students, teachers, perhaps even Harry Potter. He needed to act. But he was out of options, until one evening an idea came to him. Not a plan in the way that wizards schemed with maps and spells, but an instinct, the same kind that had guided him through the worst of his service. If he could not reach Hogwarts, and if he could not warn them again, then he would do the only thing left to him. He would force Harry Potter to stay away. It was terrible. It went against every beat of Dobby's heart. But it might save him. He began to prepare. He learned from the flue logs that the boy had returned to school after Christmas. There had been a brief flurry of confusion, some incident with a rogue barrier at King's Cross, but Potter had made it back all the same. Dobby had suspected as much. The boy was brave to a fault. Now, if the school were closed entirely, or if Harry were sent away, the quickest way, he knew, was through disaster. So Dobby turned his attention to the thing that wizards cared most about, their precious meals. He watched carefully, listening to Draco as he bragged about Hogwarts feasts, about the dishes and platters and the house elves who prepared them. One of them had once let slip a schedule for when deliveries arrived through the enchanted pantry. That was how Dobby smuggled in the bludger charm. He wept even as he did it, weaving the jinx through a piece of conjured parchment, sending it in a basket marked for the Quidditch supply cupboard. He knew it would find its mark, and when the rogue bludger struck, when Harry's arm was broken, Dobby had hoped that would be enough, that perhaps Madame Pomfrey or Professor McGonagall would see the danger and send him away. But Harry stayed. Even with bones vanished and regrown, the boy remained. So Dobby grew desperate. He made one final attempt, one last trick, one that broke every code of house elf service but one: protect the innocent. It was a week later, when Dobby heard that the chamber had fully opened. A girl had vanished. The Weasley girl, the very one who held the diary. Dobby did not sleep that night. He sat in the kitchens long after the fire had gone out, his hands wrapped around a cold kettle, staring at nothing. He had failed. There was no more hope. The diary had taken her. The monster was free, unless the boy could find her. Unless Harry Potter could do what Dobby himself could not. And somewhere, deep beneath the castle, in a chamber built by pride and sealed with hate, a memory stirred in the pages of a diary, and a name, Tom Riddle, began to take shape in the shadows. The air in Malfoy Manor had changed. Even Dobby could feel it, like a draught seeping through an unseen crack in the walls. There was a hush that clung to the rooms now, not born of peace, but of waiting, the kind of silence that followed just after a spell was cast, but before it struck, the kind that whispered of terrible things just beyond the veil. Dobby moved through the manor like a shadow, his head bowed, his hand steady, but his thoughts in constant motion. The Weasley girl was gone. He had overheard it from a letter Draco received by Owl, one he read aloud with barely concealed glee while lounging in his velvet-cushioned chair. They say she was taken right from the corridors. No one saw anything. Some think it was Potter. I told them it probably was. Dobby had nearly dropped the tray he was carrying. His limbs had gone cold, his ears prickling with dread. So it had happened. The diary had devoured her. The Chamber of Secrets had claimed its victim. He had been right to fear it. He had been too late to stop it. And yet, in that terrible moment, another thought took root in his mind, small and wild and frightening in its own way. Harry Potter was still there. Perhaps, just perhaps, he could find the girl. He remembered what he had seen in the boy's face. The resolve, the fierce loyalty, the strength that did not come from magic, but from the way he looked at the world. Potter was no ordinary wizard, of that Dobby was certain. He had defied he who must not be named, not once, but twice now, and lived. And though Dobby had done all he could to keep the boy away from Hogwarts, though he had tried to frighten and warn and block his path, a part of him had always known the truth. Harry Potter would go where he was needed, no matter the danger. The days crept by like spiders. No word came. The Malfoys moved about the house with practiced indifference, but Dobby could see the cracks beneath their calm. Lucius was more irritable than usual, snapping at Queel, ordering unnecessary cleanings, pacing in the drawing room with a drink in his hand and muttering to himself. Once Dobby caught a phrase as he passed. Should never have trusted the girl to hold it this long. It confirmed what Dobby had feared all along. The diary was not simply a tool loosed into the world by accident. It had been planted, carefully and deliberately, into the hands of someone too young and vulnerable to understand its true nature. And now, with her missing and the headmaster gone, the path was clear for something darker. Dobby still clung to the hope that his whispered message through Winky had reached someone who mattered. Perhaps Professor McGonagall, or the kind Hufflepuff head, Professor Sprout. Maybe even a ghost or portrait with the power to alert someone. But whether or not they acted, Dobby could not know. He was far from the castle, and every breath he took at Malfoy Manor seemed to tighten the invisible chain around his neck. Then came the morning when the owl arrived. It was a cold spring dawn. The mist still curled around the hedgerows, and the fire in the entrance hall had not yet been lit. Dobby was polishing the banisters when the tapping came at the tall windows. Lucius had not risen yet, so Dobby took the liberty of retrieving the letter. The owl was sleek and silent, its eyes gleaming like amber. Dobby untied the scroll with practiced fingers, smoothing the parchment and reading only the first line before panic seized him. "The diary is gone." His breath caught. He read further, not daring to believe. The girl was found in the Chamber of Secrets. Alive. Potter brought her back. The basilisk is dead. The scroll was unsigned, but Dobby did not need to see a name. The style, the slanted script. It was the same hand that had responded before. Winky had passed on news from Hogwarts. And what news it was. The diary had been destroyed. The girl was safe. And Harry Potter had done what no one else could. He had fought. A memory made flesh, slain a monster born of ancient hate, and lived. Dobby crumpled the parchment against his chest, eyes wide with wonder. Relief coursed through him so swiftly it brought tears to his eyes. It was over. The plan had failed. Lucius had lost. But victory, Dobby knew, came with consequences. Later that day, as Dobby served lunch in the salon, he listened carefully. Lucius was in a foul mood, more so than Dobby had ever seen. He had returned from the ministry only hours earlier, and his rage shimmered beneath his calm exterior like a fire hidden under coals. "They made a fool of me," he hissed to Narcissa. Dumbledore returned the moment the girl was found. The governors reversed their decision like frightened hens. He looked at me as though he knew. Narcissa sipped her tea, unruffled. "Did he?" Lucius slammed his hand down on the table. "That diary was supposed to remain secret. Destroyed? By Potter, he paused, eyes narrowing, unless someone warned him. Dobby stiffened, barely able to breathe. He's a boy, Lucius, Narcissa said coldly. If someone truly warned him, it would have to be someone very close, or very brave, or very foolish. Lucius said nothing for a long while. Then, slowly, he turned to Creel. Danton was right. End quote. You've been watching the servants. Creel gave a shallow bow. None have left the grounds since winter. Lucius's eyes narrowed. That is not what I asked. Dobby kept his gaze down. His heart thundered. Lucius was close to guessing the truth, but he did not yet know. If he had known for certain that Dobby had defied him, he would not have hesitated. House elves could not be imprisoned like wizards, but they could be bound by crueler means, turned mute, hobbled, even erased. The danger had not passed. That night, Dobby packed a small bundle of belongings, nothing more than a piece of cloth, a scrap of bread, and a button he had once found beneath the drawing-room rug. He hid it in a crack in the kitchen wall, just in case. If Lucius acted against him, Dobby meant to run. But the days passed and no punishment came, and then, one morning as Dobby cleaned the grand staircase, he heard word that chilled his blood with awe and disbelief. Lucius Malfoy had been summoned to Hogwarts. When Lucius Malfoy departed for Hogwarts, he did so with tight lips and a narrowed gaze, dressed in his finest traveling cloak, his cane polished to a mirror sheen. Narcissa had not questioned him. She knew better than to probe when her husband was in such a mood. And the servants, sensing the brewing storm, kept to the shadows. Dobby, however, watched from behind a carved pillar, his heart beating like a snitch in flight. Lucius had said nothing of his purpose, but Dobby knew. The headmaster had summoned him. Perhaps Dumbledore had uncovered the truth. Perhaps he suspected who had placed the diary in the Weasley girl's belongings. And if Lucius was forced to answer for it, there was no telling what else might unravel. Dobby waited. Hours passed. He polished the silver tea set twice, dusted the frames of every family portrait in the West Wing, and then returned to the kitchens, pretending to busy himself with preparations no one had asked for. When the afternoon light began to slant through the narrow windows, warming the stone floors with gold, the doors burst open. Lucius swept inside like a thundercloud, his face pale with fury. His cloak billowed behind him as he strode through the halls, and the manor seemed to flinch at his approach. He said not a word to Creel or the footman who met him at the door. Dobby ducked low and hurried to his cupboard, certain punishment was only moments away. But none came. He waited in silence for what felt like hours, his small body curled tightly beneath the stairs, his ears straining for the sound of footsteps. None arrived. The manor remained tense, but still. Cautiously, Dobby crept out and made his way toward the study. He found the door ajar. Inside, Lucius was standing before the fireplace, staring into the flames. His cane was resting against the arm of his chair, and one hand held a book, though not the diary. This was a newer volume, bound in green leather, the pages thin and unmarked. His grip on it was white-knuckled. Destroyed, he muttered, so low Dobby could barely hear. The boy destroyed it, and Dumbledore let him walk free. Dummy's heart leapt. So it was true. Harry had not only survived, he had succeeded. The diary and the thing within was gone, and Lucius had been bested not by a politician or a pure-blood council, but by a 12-year-old boy. Unforgivable, Lucius snarled suddenly, hurling the book into the flames. It caught at once, the fire licking greedily at the pages. He tricked me, Potter. He knew what I had done. There was silence. Then a noise. A faint pop sounded behind Dobby, and he spun around, startled. Creel stood there, arms folded, his expression unreadable. "Watching again?" Creel said. "You take too much interest in things that do not concern you." Dobby opened his mouth to deny it, but Creel held up a hand. "Spare the lies. I know what you did, Dobby." Dobby froze. Creel stepped forward slowly, his voice a hiss. "You warned the boy. You tried to steal the diary. You sent magic through the elfways, didn't you? I felt it." "I had to," Dobby whispered. "It was wrong. What they were doing, it was wrong." Creel's face twisted, not with anger, but with something colder. Disappointment. "We do not choose, Dobby. We serve. That is the law. But laws can be broken," Dobby said quietly, "and some should be." For a long moment they stood in silence. Then Creel turned away. "If you were anyone else, you would be gone already. But it's over now. You've played your part. You will keep your head down, or next time I will be the one to see you punished." He disapparated with a crack, and Dobby stood alone once more. He waited for days, expecting a summons, a beating, a binding spell, but none came. Lucius did not speak of the diary again. Whatever had transpired at Hogwarts, whatever had passed between him and Dumbledore, it had shaken him enough to bury the matter. For now. Then one morning, news reached the manor that turned Dobby's world on its head. Harry Potter had tricked Lucius Malfoy into freeing him. The tale reached the manor through the Daily Prophet, which Creel read aloud in clipped tones while Dobby scrubbed the hearth. The article was cautious, merely hinting at what had occurred, but the details were clear enough to piece together. A sock slipped into a book. A clever exchange. A master outwitted. And Dobby was free. He could hardly believe it at first. For so long, freedom had been nothing more than a dream, a distant star he could never touch. Now it was real. The magic that bound him to the Malfoys had broken like an old chain, and he felt it at once. The lightness in his limbs, the lift in his heart, the strange, dizzying joy of belonging only to himself. He ran from the manor. He didn't stop until he reached the forest beyond the estate, where the trees whispered secrets to the wind and the ground was soft with moss. He fell to his knees beneath a great oak and laughed until tears ran down his cheeks. He was free. He, Dobby the house elf, had defied his masters, protected an innocent, and been granted his freedom by the very boy he had tried so hard to save. It was not just the end of his service, it was the beginning of something greater. The days that followed were unlike anything Dobby had ever known. There were no commands, no punishments, no creaking of the manor's ancient floors overhead. The air no longer trembled with the weight of magic that bound him. He could wake when he wished, sleep when he chose, speak without fear of lightning in his blood. A strange, weightless feeling of freedom clung to him wherever he went, as though he had stepped into a dream that had not yet faded. He made a small home for himself in the hollow beneath the roots of the great oak tree where he had laughed and wept the morning he escaped. It was not much, just a nest of moss, a broken teacup he had once found discarded near the manor's stables, and a handful of leaves for bedding. But it was his, and no wizard had the right to take it from him. Still, as the novelty of liberty settled into the rhythm of daily life, Dobby found himself burdened by a quiet, persistent question. What now? Freedom, wonderful though it was, came with emptiness too. There was no one to serve, but also no one to protect. He had been born into servitude, shaped by it, hardened and softened by turns. He had lived for others' comfort and their cruel expectations. Now he lived for himself, and the silence left by that change was wide. He wandered, slipping between Muggle villages in the early mornings, watching from shadows as they went about their curious lives, lighting fires with lighters, washing clothes with machines, never noticing the small creature that passed like a breeze through their world. Occasionally he would nick a crust of bread or a pair of old socks left forgotten in a basket, never taking more than he needed, always whispering thanks to no one in particular. But even the quiet freedom of wandering was not enough. Dobby knew the world was changing. He had seen it in Lucius's eyes before he left the manor for the last time. There was fear there, and pride wounded, and a dangerous silence that spoke of grudges not yet abandoned. The Dark Lord might be gone, but not all his servants had vanished with him. And Harry Potter? Harry was still in danger. That thought settled over Dobby like a cloak he could not remove. He had protected the boy once, clumsily but earnestly, and in return Harry had set him free. The bond between them was not magic, it was choice, and Dobby had made his. He would not wander aimlessly while threats stirred in shadows. He would find a way to help. He had heard of Hogwarts accepting staff over the years, groundskeepers, caretakers, and yes, even house elves who served in the kitchens under less binding contracts than those of pure-blood families. If he could reach the castle and offer his service not as a slave but as a free elf, perhaps he could stay near Harry, watching quietly, helping where he could. He would never be a great wizard, nor a warrior, but he could still make a difference. Sometimes, small things mattered. And so, with the first frost of October glistening on the forest floor, Dobby packed his modest bundle, 2 pairs of socks, 1 mismatched glove, and a handkerchief he had mended himself, and set off north. The journey to Scotland was not an easy one for a house elf unused to long travel. He moved through woods and along hedgerows, staying clear of the roads and the curious gazes of travelers. When needed, he apparated, though he did so cautiously, for even a free elf's magic could be strained by fatigue. He slept in barns and hollows, traded small bits of charm work for scraps of food, and followed whispers of wizard roads that led ever closer to the highland. And then, one misty morning, as the sun struggled to rise behind a veil of gray cloud, Dobby crested a hill and saw Hogwarts. The castle stood like a memory, tall and eternal, its towers etched in the dawn like the bones of giants. Smoke curled from its chimneys, soft and gold against the sky. The lake below was dark and still, reflecting the turrets and the forest beyond. Even at a distance, Dobby felt the magic humming through the earth, older and deeper than anything he had known at Malfoy Manor. He approached carefully, skirting the edge of the grounds until he found the entrance to the kitchens, hidden behind a portrait of a large fruit bowl. He had heard of it from an older elf once, a cousin who had been sent here to serve during the time of Headmaster Armando Dibbet. The memory had stuck in Dobby's mind like a seed waiting to grow. He reached up and tickled the pear. The painting giggled, then swung inward to reveal a passage. Warmth rushed out at once, roasting meat, baking bread, clinking dishes, and the cheerful noise of bustling elves. Dobby stepped inside, blinking at the sudden brightness. Dozens of elves worked in harmony, each wearing clean linen and moving with calm purpose, their voices low and pleasant. Few looked up at Dobby's arrival. One, a short elf with hair tied in a neat top knot, stepped forward. "Name?" she asked politely, not unkindly. "Dobby," he said, bowing slightly. "I have come to ask for work." She tilted her head. "You is bound to whom?" "No one," Dobby said. "I's free." There was a pause. Several nearby elves glanced at one another. The elf before him nodded slowly. "Free elves do not often come here." "I know," Dobby replied. "But I wish to serve. Not under command, not by magic. I wish to help. I is not dangerous. I just wants to be close to the boy who freed me, to make sure he is safe." The elf considered this. Then she stepped aside and gestured toward a small bench. "Then you may stay. You may work as you please. We do not turn away those who wish to serve in kindness." Relief surged through Dobby like warm soup. He took his place at the edge of the room, given a small loaf of bread and a space to rest his bundle. It was not grand, it was not perfect, but it was home. And Harry Potter was not far. Life in the Hogwarts kitchen settled into a quiet rhythm that suited Dobby far better than the rigid, joyless service he had known at Malfoy Manor. Here the work was still constant, peeling potatoes, polishing cutlery, arranging steaming trays of pudding and pies, but it was done in cheer, not fear. The other house elves, though wary at first, soon came to accept him, especially when they saw how diligently he worked, and how, even when unbound, he never shirked a task nor boasted of his freedom. He asked for no special treatment, took no orders unless offered kindly, and listened more than he spoke. Though his hands remained busy, Dobby's thoughts always drifted toward Harry. He did not see him, not directly. Free elves were not permitted to roam the halls above uninvited. But he caught glimpses from time to time. Through a doorway ajar, he once saw the Gryffindor boy crossing the entrance hall, his scar barely visible beneath his fringe. Another time, he overheard students speaking of him in excited voices near the Hufflepuff corridor, recalling his duel with Draco Malfoy and the bizarre incident of the rogue bludger. But it was not until one quiet evening, as Dobby was helping clear away the remains of supper, that he heard something that made his ears prick sharply. "Harry Potter's name was in the paper again," said one of the elves, passing by with a stack of plates balanced perfectly on his head. "They say he fought off 100 Dementors on the train this time." A nearby elf scoffed. It was only 1 or 2, surely. "Still," another added with a nod, "he is very brave and kind. Always says thank you." Dobby stopped scrubbing. "Dementors?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The first elf, a stout fellow named Toddy, turned to him. "Yes, the ministry sent them to patrol the school. Something about an escaped prisoner." Dobby's heart sank. Dementors, those dreadful, soul-sucking creatures, were near Hogwarts. He had heard of them in hushed conversations back at the manor. Even the darkest wizards feared them. If they were here, something truly terrible must be unfolding. That night, Dobby lay awake in his little cot by the warm ovens, eyes wide in the dark. The thought of Harry encountering one of those monsters filled him with dread. The boy had already faced so much, more than most grown wizards, and now another shadow was falling over the school. He considered sending a message again, using the elf ways as he had before, but Winky had gone. Her family disgraced, her spirit broken, and without her as a bridge, the risk of being caught was too great. Instead, he began to listen more carefully, weaving through the kitchens with a quiet intensity, catching every whispered word and half-finished sentence from passing professors, caretakers, and visiting staff. It was through this quiet gathering of fragments that Dobby began to piece together the truth. The escaped prisoner was Sirius Black, a name he had heard before, often spoken in the same breath as the Dark Lord's most feared followers. They said he had betrayed the Potters to Voldemort, that he had killed 13 people with a single curse, that he had been imprisoned in Azkaban for 12 years and had now escaped, and that he was looking for Harry. Dobby could not believe it. How could such evil still pursue the boy? Even with the Dark Lord gone, the danger lingered, circling him like a hawk watching a mouse. He knew he could not stop the Dementors. That kind of magic was far beyond him. But he could do what elves were born to do: watch, protect, and act when others were unaware. So he began a quiet vigil. Every time Harry came near the kitchens, drawn by the smell of roast meat or perhaps a trick of the Marauder's map, Dobby lingered in the corners, unseen. When Harry passed the corridor to the kitchens late at night, Dobby was there, a faint shimmer in the dark, ensuring no unseen danger crept too close. More than once, Dobby caught sight of the boy hurrying to and from the Gryffindor common room, robes billowing behind him, face set in determined lines. There was something heavier about him now, as though each year placed a new weight upon his shoulders. But he bore it with quiet resolve, just as he had in the second year. Then one evening, Dobby overheard something that brought both wonder and unease. People on their way to the kitchens. He was in the corner of the kitchens, folding napkins into enchanted swans for the next day's feast, when a visiting elf from the astronomy tower mentioned in passing that Professor Lupin had been seen talking to a large black dog in the woods. "Strange thing that," she said. "No leash, no collar, but the professor was speaking to it like an old friend." Dobby's hands froze mid-fold. A black dog. He had read something about that in one of the books left behind in the staff lounge. Animagi, wizards who could change their form into animals. And he remembered that Sirius Black had once been part of a group of powerful rule-baking students during the First Wizarding War. Could it be? The thought struck him like a lightning bolt. What if Black wasn't trying to harm Harry? What if everything the wizarding world believed was a lie? He felt the same stirring in his chest he had felt the night he had heard Lucius speak of the diary. A deep instinct, old and rooted in magic, told him the truth was not what it seemed, but the danger was still real. And even if Black was not the villain they claimed, others believed he was. Harry remained at the center of it all. Dobby began to do small things, nothing bold, nothing foolish, just quiet acts of caution. He enchanted a set of Gryffindor boots to squeak slightly when stepped in, enough to warn of someone behind. He charmed a brass doorknob near the great hall to cool rapidly if touched by a hand carrying a concealed wand. He mended a loose stone on the main staircase that might have tripped someone running too fast, head turned. He did it all without thanks, without notice, and without regret. Harry Potter would never know. But Dobby did not mind. He was free now, not only from the Malfoys, but from fear. And freedom, he had learned, was not only the right to walk unshackled, but the choice to protect those who could not see the danger themselves. The air around Hogwarts grew colder as autumn gave way to winter. The first snows fell softly upon the castle grounds, turning the towers into spires of white stone and silver frost, while the forbidden forest stood silent and still, its trees draped in icy lace. Inside, fires burned cheerfully in the hearths. Students hurried to and fro with scarves flying behind them, and the scent of cinnamon and cloves drifted from the kitchens with the promise of holiday feasts. To most, it was a season of laughter and warmth. But Dobby watched more carefully than ever. Though the castle felt secure on the surface, he knew better than to trust appearances. The Dementors still patrolled the boundaries, their presence like cold shadows lingering at the edge of every joyful moment. Dobby had glimpsed them once. Tall, cloaked figures gliding along the edge of the forest, the very air around them turning brittle and thin, as though even light refused to touch them. He had crouched low in the snow, hidden behind a hedge, watching their faceless hoods tilt toward the school walls. Whatever their orders were, they did not walk in search of justice. They hungered for something else. In the warmth of the kitchens, the elves spoke of other things. A hippogriff had been sentenced to death, a student had fainted on the train, and Harry Potter had learned the Patronus charm. That last piece of news Dobby heard from Toddy, who had it from a portrait frame that sometimes listened at the staff room door. They say he conjured a full Patronus, Dotty said, barely able to contain his admiration. Not a wisp or a shimmer, but a true one, solid, silver, a stag. A stag? Dobby whispered, eyes wide. Like a real creature? Yes, Toddy nodded. Glowed like moonlight, drove the Dementors off him and his friends. Pride welled up in Dobby's chest. Harry was growing stronger. He was learning powerful magic, not dark and twisted like the kind Dobby had once feared in the manor, but good magic, light-filled, protective. Still, he knew it came at a cost. The Patronus charm was not easily mastered, and it required memories of great joy, something rare and precious, especially for one whose past was marked by loss. In the quiet of the night, when the castle was asleep and only the faint crackle of dying fires remained, Dobby would sit beside the ovens, knitting a new pair of socks or stitching tiny buttons onto a child-sized jumper, and wonder what memory Harry had used to summon such a powerful Patronus. He liked to think it had been something simple, a hug from his mother perhaps, or a game of chess with Ron, or a letter delivered by Owl in the middle of a long gray summer. Then came news that made Dobby tremble. Black had broken into the castle. The whisper passed like lightning through the kitchens, carried in hurried tones and wide eyes. He had gotten past the Dementors, had somehow entered the Gryffindor common room, and left without harming a single soul. The fat lady in the portrait was in hysterics. Students were frightened, professors were furious, but still the man had not been caught. That night, Dobby could not sleep. He lay awake, staring at the beams above his bed, trying to fit the pieces together. If Sirius Black had truly been the Potter's friend, as the books claimed, Why had he spared Harry? Why had he entered and left without confrontation? Could it be that his purpose was not murder, but something else? A warning? A message? The world above was full of riddles, and Dobby could only see the corners of them. Still, he would not let his doubts paralyze him. He continued his quiet work, padding through the lower halls with a dust rag in one hand and a listening ear turned to every passing student or ghost. He found a cracked tile near the charms classroom and fixed it before anyone could trip. He noticed the sharp edge of a banister that had splintered and softened it with a charm, and one evening, after hearing a rumor that Filch's cat had gone missing again, he crept into the dungeons and found her, curled behind a barrel, cold and hungry. He carried her back to the caretaker's rooms, wrapped in a dishcloth, unnoticed and unthanked, and was glad for it. Then came the night of the storm. Rain lashed the windows like claws, and thunder rolled across the sky in waves. The wind howled through the corridors, rattling portraits and causing tapestries to billow like sails. Dobby had just finished drying the stone floor outside the great hall when a sudden silence fell, unnatural and deep. The torches dimmed. The air grew cold. He knew that cold. Dobby spun and darted behind a suit of armor, heart hammering in his chest. A Dementor glided silently down the corridor, its hooded head turning slowly from side to side. Behind it came another, and another. They moved with dreadful grace, as if drawn by scent, ignoring the castle's warmth, heading deeper within. He didn't know what they searched for, but he feared. Without thinking, he slipped from his hiding place and followed. He kept to the shadows, darting from alcove to archway, always keeping a safe distance. The Dementors moved toward the Gryffindor wing. His chest tightened. If they reached Harry, if they crossed that final threshold, the boy might not have the strength to drive them back a second time. Then, just as the lead Dementor turned down the final corridor, a beam of silver light burst forth from the staircase above. It was a stag, brilliant and blazing, hooves striking the flagstones without sound, antlers high. The Dementors halted at once, cloaks flaring as though caught in a storm. The stag charged, and with a terrible, soundless cry, the creatures turned and fled, disappearing into the shadows like smoke into wind. Dobby stood frozen, breathless. Harry had done it again, and this time Dobby had seen it with his own eyes. When the corridor was clear and the stag vanished into silver mist, Dobby crept forward. He did not climb the stairs. He did not speak. He only knelt, placed one hand on the stone where the Patronus had stood, and smiled. Whatever came next, he believed now with all his heart that the boy he had once tried to save would one day save them all. Spring returned to Hogwarts in a slow, hesitant way, like a shy guest unsure of its welcome. The snow retreated into the shadows, leaving behind patches of damp earth and early crocuses that dared to bloom beneath bare-limbed trees. The sky lightened bit by bit, and birds returned to the rafters, their songs echoing through the courtyards once more. But though the air softened and the castle walls grew warmer, the tension that had hovered over the school all year did not fully vanish. Whispers still followed Harry wherever he walked, and not only because he had conjured a full Patronus. His name clung to every secret spoken in corners, every glance exchanged behind classroom doors. The students admired him, certainly. Some even envied him, but they also feared what always seemed to come in his wake. Dobby watching all this from the quiet of the kitchens and the narrow stone corridors below, understood what most did not. Power followed Harry, not because he sought it, but because he had been chosen by the world's cruelties to stand against it. Danger pursued him not because he wished for glory, but because others hungered to see him fall. Dobby had served powerful wizards before, Lucius Malfoy chief among them, and none of them had borne the weight Harry carried without boasting, scheming, or destroying all they touched. But Harry bore it differently, bravely. The castle grew restless with the coming of exams, and the corridors filled with the scratch of quills, the shuffling of books, and the occasional shriek from someone who had just realized they'd left their potions notes in the owlry. Even among the elves, the work increased. There were celebratory feasts to plan, towers of desserts to enchant, banners to mend and polish before the final house points were tallied. Dobby worked as hard as any of them, but his thoughts remained elsewhere. He had heard of the final Quidditch match through Toddy, who had an ear for student gossip, and he knew Harry would be playing. The boy had taken a terrible fall in the previous match, high winds and a Dementor's interference, and though he had recovered, Dobby worried. The morning of the match dawned bright and clear, a rare gift for Scotland in spring. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the great hall, setting the golden plates aglow and casting dancing reflections across the floor. Dobby lingered in the kitchens longer than usual, listening for any hint of trouble, but nothing came. The castle was calm. Then came the roar. It echoed through the stones like thunder, rising from the stadium at the edge of the grounds. Dobby froze, ears perked. Another cheer followed, then more, building into a crescendo of delighted screams. Students stampeded back into the halls minutes later, bursting with news. Harry had caught the snitch. Gryffindor had won the cup. It had been the most thrilling match in years. Dobby's chest swelled with pride. It was a small thing, perhaps, a game, but for Harry, it was joy. It was triumph. It was something untainted by dark memories or cursed objects, something purely his own. He had earned it. He deserved it. That evening, the kitchens were alive with celebration. The elves worked tirelessly to prepare the victory feast, enchanted sugar lions roaring silently at the ends of the Gryffindor table, cherry pies shaped like snitches, and golden apple tarts that hovered slightly off their platters before settling with a delicate thump. Dobby helped without complaint. Smiling more than he had in weeks, he had seen the look on Harry's face as he left the pitch, mud-streaked, wind-swept, and grinning from ear to ear. But even amid celebration, change was coming. It began with another whisper, this one more serious, spoken in the early morning between two elves scrubbing the entrance hall tiles. Sirius Black has been caught. Dobby's ears twitched. He dropped his rag and turned, not even bothering to pretend he hadn't been listening. "Caught?" he repeated. "Where?" "In the tower," the other elf said. "Near Gryffindor. But there's talk, strange talk. Some say he's innocent, that he didn't betray the Potters after all." Dobby's breath caught in his throat. The pieces clicked into place. The black dog in the woods, the escape from Azkaban, the break-in that ended with no harm done. And now, whispers of innocence? Dobby could hardly believe it, but his instincts had guided him before, and now they screamed the truth. Sirius Black was not the villain the world believed him to be. What troubled him most, though, was the silence that followed. The next morning, there was no mention of Black's capture in the Prophet, no official announcement. It was as though the ministry wished to pretend it hadn't happened at all. Dobby sensed something had gone wrong, terribly wrong, and when he later heard that Black had escaped again, vanishing into the night without a trace, the confirmation came like ice down his spine. Gary had been involved. Dobby didn't know how, didn't know why, but something told him the boy had stood between the ministry and a terrible mistake, and had acted just as he had in the chamber, just as he always did. As the year drew to a close, and trunks were packed, and goodbyes echoed through the corridors, Dobby lingered in the shadows near the great gates, watching as the carriages rolled toward the train. He caught a glimpse of Harry seated beside his friends, looking older somehow, not in years, but in the weight behind his eyes. But he was smiling too, and Dobby took comfort in that. When the last whistle of the Hogwarts Express faded into the distance, Dobby turned and walked slowly back toward the castle. The halls were quieter now, the kitchens nearly empty. Most elves rested until the start of summer duties, and Dobby was free to roam as he pleased. He wandered to the tower stairs and sat upon the cold stone steps, looking out over the forest and the lake, letting the breeze ruffle his ears. He didn't know what would come next, whether danger would return, whether Harry would need him again, whether the world would fall once more into darkness. But he would be here. He would be ready. He was no longer a servant of cruel masters, no longer a trembling figure beneath the stairs. He was Dobby, a free elf, and he would protect Harry Potter, no matter the cost. Summer settled over Hogwarts like a warm enchantment, stretching golden fingers through every crack in the ancient stone walls. The lake shimmered in the sun, glassy and still, while the grounds blossomed with color, the scent of wild herbs and fresh grass drifting through the open windows. The students had long since gone home, their laughter and footfalls fading into memory, leaving behind silence and the occasional flutter of owl wings in the eaves. The great halls no longer echoed with clinking cutlery or murmured spells. But for those who remained, staff, ghosts, and a handful of quiet, tireless house elves, life continued, slower, but never still. Dobby moved through the kitchens with a calm purpose, polishing goblets, sorting spices, and mending the hems of tablecloths frayed by feast day revelry. He worked not because he was ordered, but because the work itself gave rhythm to his thoughts, and his thoughts remained ever drawn to the boy who had set him free. It had been a year since he had left the shadow of Malfoy Manor, a year since he had stood trembling in the burrow and begged Harry Potter to turn away from danger. He had failed, and yet he had succeeded. Not by stopping the darkness, but by helping Harry survive it. The month since Black's escape had brought no peace to the wizarding world. Whispers of you-know-who had begun to return, not in bold proclamations, not yet, but in fearful mutterings from the older witches and wizards, in the uncertain way ministry officials avoided speaking too plainly about the future. The darkness was returning, not in one blow, but in shadows gathering at the edges of the sky. Dobby felt it, like a chill in the bones, a tremble beneath the stone. He began to prepare in his own small way. He collected scraps of thread and folded cloth into sturdy travel wraps. He enchanted an old thimble to carry a flame that would never go out, even in wind or rain. He asked Toddy for a second-hand satchel, nothing large, just enough to carry what he needed if the day came when he must leave quickly or go where others would not. He did not expect war, but he had lived long enough to know it did not always announce itself with horns and banners. Sometimes it came creeping, disguised as order. One day, late in July, Dobby stood beneath the kitchen's low arch and looked out across the sun-drenched lawn. He thought of Harry again, where he was now, likely trapped once more in the Muggle world, waiting for the start of his 4th year. Dobby had heard no news, no messages through the Elfways, but he trusted the boy was safe for now. Still, a restlessness tugged at him, a sense that something was stirring, something old and dangerous, older even than the chamber's secrets or the cursed ink of Riddle's diary. And then, one afternoon, Dumbledore came to the kitchens. The headmaster's presence always caused a quiet ripple through the elves. He rarely entered in person, preferring to let the castle carry his requests. But when he did come, he was greeted with respect that bordered on reverence. Dobby stood aside as the older elves bowed, but Dumbledore's sharp blue eyes found him at once. "Ah, Dobby," he said, smiling beneath his silver beard. "May I borrow a moment of your time?" Dobby nodded, ears twitching. "Yes, sir. Of course, sir." They stepped into the smaller pantry chamber, cool and quiet behind the shelves of preserved fruit. Dumbledore took a seat on a stool, looking not so much like a headmaster now as an old wizard weary with thought. "I've come to ask something of you, Dobby," he said, fingers steepled. "Something that may not be easy. You've served this castle faithfully, and I believe you understand more than most the forces moving in the world." Dobby straightened. "I will help, Professor, however I can." "I hoped you'd say so," Dumbledore replied gently. "There are whispers of Voldemort's followers returning to their old ways, not openly, not yet, but quietly. They're gathering artifacts, allies, and secrets. One in particular concerns me. Something Lucius Malfoy once owned, a locket, dark and ancient. I believe he sold it or passed it on. I don't trust the Ministry to track it, but you know how to slip where others cannot, to listen where others will not be heard." Dobby felt the weight of the words settle upon him like a mantle. It frightened him. Of course it did. But beneath the fear was a fierce kind of pride. That Dumbledore, the greatest wizard of their time, would entrust such a task to him. "I will find it," Dobby said. "If it is still in the world, I will find it." Dumbledore nodded, eyes twinkling, though they carried a sadness deeper than usual. "Then I'll leave it in your hands. Take your time, be careful, and if ever you need aid, you need only return to Hogwarts." And so it began. Dobby left the castle at dusk, his satchel over his shoulder, his thimble light glowing softly against the encroaching dark. He did not know where the road would lead, or how far the locket had passed from wizard to wizard like a coin cursed with blood. But he would follow it. He would listen, and he would bring what he found to those who could destroy it. For Harry, for those who could not defend themselves, for freedom, not only his own, but for the world that had yet to understand what true servitude meant. The wind stirred the trees as he walked into the forest, and behind him the towers of Hogwarts stood watchful and bright against the evening sky. He was no longer in the shadows. He was the one who moved through them. And the battle ahead, though yet unseen, would know his name.